Chapter 11. The Dufflepuds Made Happy. Lucy followed the great lion out into the passage, and at once she saw coming toward them an old man, barefoot, dressed in a red robe. His white hair was crowned with a chaplet of oak leaves, his beard fell to his girdle, and he supported himself with a curiously carved staff. When he saw Aslan, he bowed low. "Welcome, sir, to the least of your houses. Do you grow weary, Karyakin, of ruling such foolish subjects as I have given you here?" "No. They are very stupid, but there is no real harm in them. I begin to grow rather fond of the creatures. Sometimes, perhaps, I am a little impatient, waiting for the day when they can be governed by wisdom instead of this rough magic." "All in good time, Karyakin." "Yes, all in very good time, sir. Do you intend to show yourself to them?" "Nay, I should frighten them out of their senses. Many stars will grow old and come to take their rest in islands before your people are ripe for that. And today, before sunset, I must visit Trumpkin the dwarf, where he sits in the castle of Cair Paravel, counting the days till his master Caspian comes home. I will tell him all your story, Lucy. Do not look so sad. We shall meet again soon." "Please, Aslan, what do you call soon?" "I call all time soon," said Aslan, and instantly he was vanished away, and Lucy was alone with the magician. "Gone," said he, "and you and I quite crestfallen. It's always like that. You can't keep him. It's not as if he were a tame lion. And how did you enjoy my book?" "Parts of it very much indeed. Did you know I was there all the time?" "Well, of course I knew when I let the duffers make themselves invisible. But you would be coming along presently to take the spell off. I wasn't sure of the exact day, and I wasn't especially on the watch this morning. You see, they had made me invisible too, and being invisible always makes me so sleepy. Hey-ho, I'm yawning again. Are you hungry?" "Well, perhaps I am a little. I've no idea what the time is." "Come, all times may be soon to Aslan, but in my home all hungry times are 1 o'clock. He led her a little way down the passage and opened a door. Passing in, Lucy found herself in a pleasant room full of sunlight and flowers. The table was bare when they entered, but it was of course a magic table, and at a word from the old man, the tablecloth, silver, plates, glasses, and food appeared. "I hope that is what you would like. I have tried to give you food more like the food of your own land than perhaps you have had lately." "It's lovely," said Lucy. And so it was. An omelette piping hot, cold lamb and green peas, a strawberry ice, lemon squash to drink, and a cup of chocolate to follow. But the magician himself drank only wine and ate only bread. There was nothing alarming about him, and Lucy and he were soon chatting away like old friends. "When will the spell work? Will the duffers be visible again at once?" "Oh, yes, they're visible now, but they'll probably be asleep still. They always take a rest in the middle of the day." "And now that they're visible, are you going to let them off being ugly? Will you make them as they were before?" "Well, that is a rather delicate question. You see, it's only they who think they were so nice to look at before. They say they've been uglified, but that isn't what I called it. Many people might say the change was for the better." "They're awfully conceited." "They are. Or at least the chief duffer is, and he's taught all the rest to be. They always believe every word he says." "Yes, we'd noticed that." "Yes. We'd get on better without him, in a way. Of course, I could turn him into something else, or even put a spell on him which would make them not believe a word he says. But I don't like to do that. It's better for them to admire him than to admire nobody." "Don't they admire you?" "Oh, no, not me. They wouldn't admire me." "What was it you uglified them for? I mean, what they call uglified." "Well, they wouldn't do what they were told. Their work is to mind the garden and raise food, not for me, as they imagine, but for themselves. They wouldn't do it at all if I didn't make them. And of course, for a garden you want water. There is a beautiful spring about half a mile away up the hill, and from that spring there flows a stream which comes right past the garden. All I asked them to do was to take their water from the stream, instead of trudging up to the spring with their buckets 2 or 3 times a day and tiring themselves out, besides spilling half of it on the way back. But they wouldn't see it. In the end they refused point blank. Are they as stupid as all that? Oh, you wouldn't believe the troubles I've had with them. A few months ago they were all for washing up the plates and knives before dinner. They said it saved time afterward. I've caught them planting boiled potatoes to save cooking them when they are dug up. One day the cat got into the dairy, and 20 of them were at work moving all the milk out. No one thought of moving the cat. But I see you've finished. Let us go and look at the duffers now they can be looked at. They went into another room, which was full of polished instruments hard to understand, such as astrolabes, orreries, chronoscopes, poisometers, columbusses, and theodolines. And here, when they had come to the window, the magician said, "There are your duffers." "I don't see anybody. What are those mushroom things?" The things she pointed at were dotted all over the level grass. They were certainly very like mushrooms, but far too big. The stalks about 3 feet high, and the umbrellas about the same length from edge to edge. When she looked carefully, she noticed too that the stalks joined the umbrellas not in the middle, but at one side, which gave them an unbalanced look. And there was something, a sort of little bundle, lying on the grass at the foot of each stalk. In fact, the longer she gazed at them, the less like mushrooms they appeared. The umbrella part was not really round as she had thought it at first. It was longer than it was broad, and it widened at one end. There were a great many of them, 50 or more. The clock struck 3. Instantly a most extraordinary thing happened. Each of the mushrooms suddenly turned upside down. The little bundles which had lain at the bottom of the stalks were heads and bodies. The stalks themselves were legs, but not 2 legs to each body. Each body had a single thick leg right under it, not to one side like the leg of a one-legged man, and at the end of it a single enormous foot. A broad-toed foot, with the toes curling up a little, so that it looked rather like a small canoe. She saw in a moment why they'd looked like mushrooms. They'd been lying flat on their backs, each with its single leg straight up in the air, and its enormous foot spread out above it. She learned afterwards that this was their ordinary way of resting, for the foot kept off both rain and sun, and for a monopod to lie under its own foot is almost as good as being in a tent. "Oh, they're funny! The funnies!" cried Lucy, bursting into laughter. "Did you make them like that?" Yes. I made the duffers into monopods." He too was laughing till the tears ran down his cheeks. "But watch." It was worth watching. Of course, these little one-footed men couldn't walk or run as we do. They got about by jumping, like fleas or frogs. And what jumps they made, as if each big foot was a mass of springs, and with what a bounce they came down. That was what made the thumping noise which had so puzzled Lucy yesterday. For now they were jumping in all directions and calling out to one another. "Hey, lads! We're visible again! Visible we are!" said one in a tasselled red cap, who was obviously the chief monopod. "And what I say is, when chaps are visible, why, they can see one another." "Oh, here it is, Chief! Here it is, Chief!" cried all the others. "That's the point! No one's got a clearer head than you. You couldn't have made it plainer. She caught the old man napping, that little girl did. We've beaten him this time. Just where we're going to set ourselves. You're going stronger than ever today, Chief. Keep it up, keep it up." "Do they dare to talk about you like that? They seemed so afraid of you yesterday. Don't they know you might be listening?" That's one of the funny things about the duffers. One minute they talk as if I ran everything and overheard everything and was extremely dangerous. The next moment they think they can take me in by tricks that a baby would see through. Oh, bless them. Will they have to be turned back into their proper shapes? Oh, I do hope it wouldn't be unkind to leave them as they are. Do they really mind very much? They seem very happy. I say, look at that jump. What were they like before? Common little dwarfs. Nothing like so nice as the sort you have in Narnia. It'd be a pity to change them back. They're so funny and rather nice. Do you think it would make any difference if I told them that? I'm sure it would. If you could get it into their heads. Will you come with me and try? Oh, no, you'll get on far better without me. Thanks awfully for the lunch, said Lucy, and turned quickly away. She ran down the stairs, which she'd come up so nervously that morning, and cannoned into Edmund at the bottom. All the others were there with him, waiting, and Lucy's conscience smote her when she saw their anxious faces, and realised how long she'd forgotten them. It's all right. Everything's all right. The magician's a brick, and I've seen him, Aslan. After that she went from them like the wind and out into the garden. Here the earth was shaking with the jumps and the air ringing with the shouts of the monopods. Both were redoubled when they caught sight of her. Here she comes! Here she comes! 3 cheers for the little girl! Oh, she put it across the old gentleman properly, she did. And we're extremely regrettable, said the chief monopod, that we can't give you the pleasure of seeing us as we were before we were uglified, for you wouldn't believe the difference, and that's the truth. But there's no denying we're mortal ugly now, and we won't deceive you. Ah, that we are, Chief, that we are, echoed the others, bouncing like so many toy balloons. You've said it, you've said it. But I don't think you are at all. I think you look very nice. You're true for you, Missy, very nice we look. You couldn't find an handsomer lot. They said this without any surprise, and did not seem to notice they'd changed their minds. She's a-saying, remarked the chief monopod, as how we looked very nice before we were uglified. Yes, true for you, Chief, true for you. That's what she says. We heard her ourselves. I did not, bawled Lucy. I said you're very nice now. So she did, said we were very nice then. You're 'em both, said the monopods. There's a pair for you, always right. They couldn't have put it better. But we're saying just the opposite, said Lucy, stamping her foot with impatience. So you are, to be sure, so you are. Nothing like an opposite. Keep it up, both of you. Oh, you're enough to drive anyone mad. Lucy gave up. But the monopod seemed perfectly contented, and she decided that on the whole the conversation had been a success. And before everyone went to bed that evening, something else happened which made them even more satisfied with their one-legged condition. Caspian and all the Narnians went back as soon as possible to the shore to give their news to Rince and the others on board the Dawn Treader, who were now very anxious. And, of course, the monopods went with them, bouncing like footballs and agreeing with one another in loud voices, till Eustace said, I wish the magician had make them inaudible instead of invisible. He was soon very sorry he'd said that, because he had to explain that an inaudible thing is something you can't hear, and though he took a lot of trouble, he never felt sure that the monopods had really understood. And what especially annoyed him was that they said, in the end, he can't put things the way our chief does. But you'll learn, young man. Hark to him, and he'll show you how to say things. Oh, there's a speaker for you. When they reached the bay, Reaping Sheep had a brilliant idea. He had his little coracle lowered and paddled himself about in it till the monopods were thoroughly interested. He then stood up in it and said, Worthy and intelligent monopods, you do not need boats. Each of you has a foot that will do instead. Just jump as lightly as you can on the water and see what happens. The chief monopod hung back and warned the others that they'd find the water powerful wet. But one or two of the younger ones tried it almost at once, and then a few others followed their example, and at last the whole lot did the same. It worked perfectly. The huge single foot of a monopod acted as a natural raft or boat, and when Reaping Sheep had taught them how to cut rude paddles for themselves, They all paddled about the bay and round the Dawn Treader, looking for all the world like a fleet of little canoes, with a fat dwarf standing up in the stern of each. And they had races, and bottles of wine were lowered down to them from the ship as prizes, and the sailors stood leaning over the ship's sides and laughed till their own sides ached. The duffers were also very pleased with their new name of monopods, which seemed to them a magnificent name, though they never got it right. "That's what we are, moneypods, pominods, podimons, just what it was on the tip of our tongue to call ourselves." But they soon got it mixed up with their old name of duffers, and finally settled down to calling themselves the Dufflepods, and that is what they will probably be called for centuries. That evening all the Narnians dined upstairs with the magician, and Lucy noticed how different the whole top floor looked, now she was no longer afraid of it. The mysterious signs on the doors were still mysterious, but now looked as if they had kind and cheerful meanings, and even the bearded mirror now seemed funny rather than frightening. At dinner everyone had by magic what everyone liked best to eat and drink, and after dinner the magician did a very useful and beautiful piece of magic. He laid 2 blank sheets of parchment on the table, and asked Drinian to give him an account exactly of their voyage up to date. And as Drinian spoke, everything he described came out on the parchment in fine, clear lines, till at last each sheet was a splendid map of the Eastern Ocean, showing Gallima, Terebinthia, the 7 Isles, the Lone Islands, Dragon Island, Burnt Island, Deathwater, and the land of the Duffers itself, all exactly the right sizes, and in the right positions. They were the first maps ever made of those seas, and better than any that have been made since without magic. For on these, though the towns and mountains looked at first just as they would on an ordinary map, when the magician lent them a magnifying glass, you saw that they were perfect little pictures of the real things, so that you could see the very castle and slave market and streets in Narrowhaven, all very clear, though very distant, like things seen through the wrong end of a telescope. The only drawback was that the coastline of most of the islands was incomplete, for the map showed only what Drinian had seen with his own eyes. When they were finished, the magician kept one himself and presented the other to Caspian. It still hangs in his chamber of instruments at Cape Araval. But the magician could tell them nothing about seas or lands further east. He did, however, tell them that about 7 years before a Narnian ship had put in at his waters, and that she had on board the Lords Revilian, Argos, Mavramorn, and Roop. So they judged that the golden man they had seen lying in Deathwater must be the Lord Restamar. Next day the magician magically mended the stern of the Dawn Treader, where it had been damaged by the sea serpent, and loaded her with useful gifts. It was a most friendly parting, and when she sailed 2 hours after noon, all the Dufflepods paddled out with her to the harbour mouth, and cheered until she was out of sound of their cheering. Chapter 12. The Dark Island. After this adventure they sailed on south and a little east for 12 days, with a gentle wind, the skies being mostly clear and the air warm, and saw no bird or fish, except that once there were whales spouting a long way to starboard. Lucy and Reepicheep played a good deal of chess at this time. Then, on the 13th day, Edmund from a fighting top sighted what looked like a great dark mountain rising out of the sea on their port bow. They altered course and made for this land, mostly by oar, for the wind would not serve them to sail north-east. When evening fell they were still a long way from it, and rowed all night. Next morning the weather was fair, but a flat calm. The dark mass lay ahead, much nearer and larger, but still very dim, so that some thought it was still a long way off, and others thought they were running into a mist. About 9 that morning, very suddenly, it was so close that they could see that it was not land at all, nor even, in an ordinary sense, a mist. It was a darkness. It's rather hard to describe, but you will see what it was like if you imagine yourself looking into the mouth of a railway tunnel, a tunnel either so long or so twisty that you cannot see the light at the far end. And you know what it would be like. For a few feet you would see the rails and sleepers and gravel in broad daylight. Then there would come the place where they were in twilight, and then, pretty suddenly, but of course without a sharp dividing line, they would vanish altogether into smooth, solid blackness. It was just so here. For a few feet in front of their bows they could see the swell of a bright greenish-blue water. Beyond that they could see the water looking pale and grey, as it would look late in the evening. But beyond that again, utter blackness, as if they had come to the edge of moonless and starless night. Caspian shouted to the boatswain to keep her back, and all except the rowers rushed forward and gazed from the bows. But there was nothing to be seen by gazing. Behind them was the sea and the sun, before them the darkness. "Do we go into this?" asked Caspian at length. "Not by my advice," said Drinian. "The captain's right," said several sailors. "Almost think he is," said Edmund. Lucy and Eustace didn't speak, but they felt very glad inside at the turn things seemed to be taking. But all at once the clear voice of Reepicheep broke in upon the silence. "And why not? Will someone explain to me why not?" No one was anxious to explain, so Reepicheep continued. "If I were addressing peasants or slaves, I might suppose that the suggestion proceeded from cowardice. But I hope it will never be told in Narnia that a company of noble and royal persons, in the flower of their age, turned tail because they were afraid of the dark." "But what manner of use would it be ploughing through that blackness?" asked Drinian. "Use? Use, Captain? If by use you mean filling our bellies or our purses, I confess it will be no use at all. So far as I know, we did not set sail to look for things useful, but to seek honour and adventure. And here is as great an adventure as ever I heard of. And here, if we turn back, no little impeachment of all our honours." Several of the sailors said things under their breath that sounded like "honour be blowed." But Caspian said, "Oh, bother you, Reepicheep. I almost wish we'd left you at home." "All right. If you put it that way, I suppose we shall have to go on. Unless Lucy would rather not." Lucy felt she would very much rather not. But what she said out loud was, "I'm game." "Your Majesty will at least order lights." "By all means. See to it, Captain." So the 3 lanterns at the stern, and the prow, and the masthead were all lit, and Drinian ordered 2 torches amidships. Pale and feeble they looked in the sunshine. Then all the men, except some who were left below at the oars, were ordered on deck, and fully armed and posted in their battle stations with swords drawn. Lucy and 2 archers were posted on the fighting top, with bows bent and arrows on the string. Reinulf was in the bows, with his line ready to take soundings. Reepicheep, Edmund, Eustace, and Caspian, glittering in mail, were with him. Drinian took the tiller. "And now, in Aslan's name, forward! A slow, steady stroke. Let every man be silent, and keep his ears open for orders." With a creak and a groan, the Dawn Treader started to creep forward as the men began to row. Lucy, up in the fighting top, had a wonderful view of the exact moment at which they entered the darkness. The bows had already disappeared before the sunlight left the stern. She saw it go. At 1 minute the gilded stern, the blue sea, and the sky were all in broad daylight. Next minute the sea and sky had vanished. The stern lantern, which had been hardly noticeable before, was the only thing to show where the ship ended. In front of the lantern she could see the black shape of Drinian crouching at the tiller. Down below her the 2 torches made visible 2 small patches of deck and gleamed on swords and helmets. And forward there was another island of light on the forecastle. Apart from that, the fighting top, lit by the masthead light, which was only just above her, seemed to be a little lighted world of its own, floating in lonely darkness. And the lights themselves, as always happens with lights when you have them at the wrong time of day, looked lurid and unnatural. She also noticed that she was very cold. How long this voyage into the darkness lasted, nobody knew, except for the creak of the rowlocks and the splash of the oars. There was nothing to show that they were moving at all. Edmund, peering from the bows, could see nothing except the reflection of a lantern in the water before him. It looked a greasy sort of reflection, and the ripple made by their advancing prow appeared to be heavy, small, and lifeless. As time went on, everyone except the rowers began to shiver with cold. Suddenly, from somewhere, as no one's sense of direction was very clear by now, there came a cry, either of some inhuman voice, or else a voice of one in such extremity of terror that he had almost lost his humanity. Caspian was still trying to speak. His mouth was too dry, when the shrill voice of Reepicheep, which sounded louder than usual in that silence, was heard. "Who calls? If you are a foe, we do not fear you, and if you are a friend, your enemies shall be taught the fear of us." "Mercy! Mercy! Even if you are only one more dream, have mercy. Take me on board. Take me, even if you strike me dead, but in the name of all mercies, do not fade away, and leave me in this horrible land." "Where are you? Come aboard and welcome." There came another cry, whether of joy or terror, and then they knew that someone was swimming towards them. "Stand by to heave him up," said Caspian. "Aye, aye, your majesty," said the sailors. Several crowded to the port bulwark with ropes, and one leaning far out over the side held the torch. A wild, white face appeared in the blackness of the water, and then, after some scrambling and pulling, a dozen friendly hands had heaved the stranger on board. Edmund thought he'd never seen a wilder-looking man. Though he did not otherwise look very old, his hair was an untidy mop of white, his face was thin and drawn, and for clothing only a few wet rags hung about him. But what one mainly noticed were his eyes, which were so widely opened that he seemed to have no eyelids at all, and stared as if he were in an agony of pure fear. The moment his feet reached the deck, he said, "Fly, fly, about your ship and fly! Row, row, row for your lives, away from this accursed shore!" "Compose yourself, and tell us what the danger is. We are not used to flying." The stranger started horribly at the voice of the mouth, which she had not noticed before. "Nevertheless, you will fly from here. This is the island where dreams come true." "That's the island I've been looking for this long time," said one of the sailors. "I'd reckon I'd find I was married to Nancy if we landed here." "And I'd find Tom alive again," said another. "Fools!" said the man, stamping his foot with rage. "That's the sort of talk that brought me here, and I'd better have been drowned or never born. Do you hear what I say? This is where dreams, do you understand? Come to life, come real, not daydreams, dreams." There was about half a minute's silence, and then, with a great clatter of armour, the whole crew were tumbling down the main hatch as quick as they could, and flinging themselves onto the oars to row as they'd never rowed before. And Drinian was swinging round the tiller, and the boatswain was giving out the quickest stroke that had ever been heard at sea, for it had taken everyone just that half-minute to remember certain dreams they had had, dreams that make you afraid of going to sleep again, and to realise what it would mean to land on a country where those dreams come true. Only Reepicheep remained unmoved. Your Majesty, are you going to tolerate this mutiny? This poltroonery? This is panic! This is a rout!" "Row! Row!" bellowed Caspian. "Pull for all our lives! Is her head right, Drinian? You can say what you like, Reepicheep. There are some things no man can face." "Then it is my good fortune not to be a man," said Reepicheep, with a very stiff bow. Lucy from up aloft had heard it all. In an instant that one of her own dreams which she had tried hardest to forget came back to her as vividly as she'd only just woken from it. So that was what was behind them. on the island in the darkness. For a second she wanted to go down to the deck and be with Edmund and Caspian. But what was the use if dreams were coming true? Edmund and Caspian themselves might turn into something horrible just as she reached them. She gripped the rail of the fighting top and tried to steady herself. They were rowing back to the light as hard as they could. It would be all right in a few seconds. But oh, if only it could be all right now. Though the rowing made a good deal of noise, it did not quite conceal the total silence which surrounded the ship. Everyone knew it would be better not to listen, not to strain his ears for any sound from the darkness, but no one could help listening, and soon everyone was hearing things. Each one heard something different. "Do you hear a noise like a huge pair of scissors opening and shutting over there?" Eustace asked Reinolf. "Hush," said Reinolf. "I can hear them crawling up the side of the ship." "It's going to settle on the mast," said Caspian. "Oh," said a sailor. "There are the gongs beginning. I knew they would." Caspian, trying not to look at anything, especially not to keep looking behind him, went aft to Drinian. "Drinian, how long did we take rowing in? I mean rowing to where we picked up the stranger?" 5 minutes, perhaps." "Why?" "Because we've been more than that already, trying to get out." Drinian's hand shook on the tiller, and a line of cold sweat ran down his face. The same idea was occurring to everyone on board. "We shall never get out, never get out, never get out, never get out. He's steering us wrong. We're going round and round in circles. We shall never get out, never get out, never get out." The stranger, who'd been lying in a huddled heap on the deck, sat up and burst out into a horrible screaming laugh. "Never get out! That's it, of course, we shall never get out! What a fool I was to have thought that they would let it go as easily as that! No, no! We shall never get out!" Lucy leant her head on the edge of a fighting top and whispered, "Aslan, Aslan, if ever you loved us at all, send us help now." The darkness did not grow any less, but she began to feel a little, a very little better. "After all, nothing's really happened to us yet." "Look!" cried Reinolf's voice hoarsely from the bows. There was a tiny speck of light ahead, and while they watched, a broad beam of light fell from it upon the ship. It did not alter the surrounding darkness, but the whole ship was lit up as if by a searchlight. Caspian blinked and stared around, saw the faces of his companions, all wild, fixed expressions, everyone staring in the same direction. Behind everyone lay his black, sharply edged shadow. Lucy looked along the beam and presently saw something in it. At first it looked like a cross, then it looked like an aeroplane, then it looked like a kite, and at last, with a whirring of wings, it was right overhead. It was an albatross. It circled 3 times round the mast, and then perched for an instant on the crest of a gilded dragon at the prow. It called out in a strong, sweet voice what seemed to be words, though no one understood them. After that it spread its wings, rose, and began to fly slowly ahead, bearing a little to starboard. Drinian steered after it, not doubting that it offered good guidance. But no one except Lucy knew that as it circled the mast, it had whispered to her, "Courage, dear." The voice she felt sure was Aslan's, and with the voice a delicious smell breathed in her face. In a few moments the darkness turned into a greyness ahead, and then, almost before they dared to begin hoping, they had shot out into the sunlight and were in the warm blue world again. And all at once everybody realized that there was nothing to be afraid of and never had been. They blinked their eyes and looked about them. The brightness of the ship herself astonished them. They'd half expected to find that the darkness would cling to the white and green and the gold in the form of some grime or scum. And then, first one, and then another, began laughing. I reckon we made pretty good fools of ourselves. Lucy lost no time in coming down to the deck, where she found the others all gathered round the newcomer. For a long time he was too happy to speak, and could only gaze at the sea and the sun, and feel the bulwarks and the ropes, as if to make sure he was really awake, while tears rolled down his cheeks. Thank you, he said at last. You have saved me from... But I won't talk of that. Now, let me know who you are. I am a Telmarine of Narnia, and when I was worth anything, men called me the Lord Roop. And I am Caspian, King of Narnia, and I sail to find you and your companions who were my father's friends. Lord Roop fell on his knees and kissed the king's hand. Sire, you are the man in all the world I most wish to see. Oh, grant me a boon. What is it? Never to bring me back there. He pointed astern. They all looked, but they saw only bright blue sea and bright blue sky. The dark island and the darkness had vanished forever. Why, you have destroyed it. I don't think it was us. Sire, said Drinian, this wind is fair for the southeast. Shall I have our poor fellows set up a sail? And after that everyone who can be spared to his hammock? Yes, and let there be grog all round. Hey-ho, I feel I could slip the clock round myself. So all afternoon, with great joy, they sailed southeast with a fair wind. But nobody noticed when the albatross had disappeared. Chapter 13. The Three Sleepers. The wind never failed, but it grew gentler every day, till at length the waves were little more than ripples, and the ship glided on hour after hour, almost as if they were sailing on a lake. And every night they saw that there rose in the east new constellations, which no one had ever seen in Narnia, and perhaps, as Lucy thought, with a mixture of joy and fear, no living eye had seen at all. Those new stars were big and bright, and the nights were warm. Most of them slept on deck and talked far into the night, or hung over the ship's side, watching the luminous dance of the foam thrown up by the bows. On an evening of startling beauty, when the sunset behind them was so crimson and purple and widely spread that the very sky itself seemed to have grown larger, they came in sight of land on their starboard bow. It came slowly nearer, and the light behind them made it look as if the capes and headlands of this new country were all on fire. But presently they were sailing along its coast, and its western cape now rose up astern of them, black against the red sky, and sharp as if it was cut out of cardboard. And then they could see better what this country was like. It had no mountains, but many gentle hills with slopes like pillows. An attractive smell came from it that Lucy called a dim purple kind of smell, which Edmund said, and Rince thought, was rot. But Caspian said, I know what you mean. They sailed on a good way, past point after point, hoping to find a nice deep harbour, but had to content themselves in the end with a wide and shallow bay. Though it had seemed calm out at sea, there was of course surf breaking on the sand, and they could not bring Dawn Treader in as far as they would have liked. They dropped anchor a good way from the beach, and had a wet and tumbling landing in the boat. The Lord Roop remained on board the Dawn Treader. He wished to see no more islands. All the time that they remained in this country, the sound of the long breakers was in their ears. 2 men were left to guard the boat, and Caspian led the others inland. But not far, because it was too late for exploring, and the light would soon go. But there was no need to go too far to find an adventure. The level valley which lay at the head of the bay showed no road or track or other sign of habitation. Underfoot was fine springy turf dotted here and there with a low bushy growth, which Edmund and Lucy took for heather. Eustace, who was really rather good at botany, said it wasn't, and he was probably right, but it was something of very much the same kind. When we'd gone less than a bowshot from the shore, Drinian said, Look, what's that? Are they giant trees? Said Caspian. Towers, I think, said Eustace. It might be giants, said Edmund in a lower voice.
"The way to find out is to go right in among them,"
said Weeping Sheep, drawing his sword and pattering off ahead of everyone else. "I think it's a ruin," said Lucy, when they got a good deal nearer, and her guess was the best so far. What they saw now was a wide oblong space, flagged with smooth stones and surrounded by grey pillars, but unroofed, and from end to end of it ran a long table, laid with a rich crimson cloth, that came down nearly to the pavement. At either side of it were many chairs of stone, richly carved, and with silken cushions upon the seats. And on the table itself there was set out such a banquet as had ever been seen. Not even when Peter the High King kept his court at Cape Paravel. There were turkeys and geese and peacocks. There were boars' heads and sides of venison. There were pies shaped like ships under full sail, or like dragons and elephants. There were ice puddings, and bright lobsters, and gleaming salmon. There were nuts and grapes, pineapples and peaches, pomegranates, and melons and tomatoes. There were flagons of gold and silver, and curiously wrought glass, and the smell of the fruit and the wine blew towards them like a promise of all happiness. "I say," said Lucy. They came nearer and nearer, all very quietly. "Where are the guests?" asked Eustace. "We can provide that, sir," said Rince. "Look," said Edmund sharply. They were actually within the pillars now, and standing on the pavement. Everyone looked where Edmund had pointed. The chairs were not all empty. At the head of the table, and in the two places beside it, there was something, or possibly three somethings. "What are those? It looks like 3 beavers sitting on the table. Or a huge bird's nest. Looks more like a haystack to me." Weeping Sheep ran forward and jumped on a chair, and thence onto the table, and ran along it, threading his way as nimbly as a dancer between jewelled cups and pyramids of fruit and ivory salt-cellars. He ran right up to the mysterious grey mass at the end, peered, touched, and then called out, "These will not fight, I think." Everyone now came close, and saw that what was sat in those 3 chairs was 3 men, though hard to recognise as men till you looked closely. Their hair, which was grey, had grown over their eyes, till it almost concealed their faces, and their beards had grown over the table, climbing round and entwining plates and goblets as brambles entwine a fence, until all mixed in one great mat of hair. They flowed over the edge and down to the floor, and from their heads the hair hung over the backs of their chairs, so that they were wholly hidden. In fact, the 3 men were nearly all hair. "Dead?" said Caspian. "I think not, sire," said Weeping Sheep, lifting one of their hands out of a tangle of hair in his 2 paws. "This one is warm, and his pulse beats." "This one too, and this." "Why, they're only asleep." "It's been a long sleep, though," said Edmund, "to let their hair grow like this." "It must have been enchanted sleep," said Lucy. "I felt the moment we landed on this island it was full of magic. Oh, do you think we perhaps come here to break it?" "Well, we can try," said Caspian, and began shaking the nearest of the 3 sleepers. For a moment everyone thought he was going to be successful, for the man breathed hard and muttered,
"I'll go eastward no more. Out oars for Narnia."
He sunk back almost at once into a yet deeper sleep than before. That is, his heavy head sagged a few inches lower towards the table, and all efforts to rouse him again were useless. With the second, it was much the same. "Weren't born to live like animals. Get to the west while you've a chance. Land's behind the sun," and sank down. The third only said, "Mustard, please," and slept hard. "Out oars for Narnia, eh?" "Yes. You're right, Drinian. I think our quest is at an end. Let's look at their rings." "Yes, these are their devices. This is the Lord Revilian, this is the Lord Argos, and this is the Lord Mavramorn." "But we can't wake them. What are we to do?" "Begging your Majesty's pardons all," said Rince, "but why not fall to while you're discussing it? We don't see a dinner like this every day. Not for your life, said Caspian. That's right, said several of the sailors. Too much magic about here. The sooner we're back on board, the better.
Depend upon it, it was from eating this food that the three lords came by a 7-year sleep.
I wouldn't touch it to save my life. The light's going uncommon quick, said Reinolf. Back to the ship, muttered the men. I really think, said Edmund, they're right. We can decide what to do with the 3 sleepers tomorrow. We daren't eat the food, and there's no point in staying here for the night. The whole place smells of magic and danger.
I am entirely of King Edmund's opinion, as far as concerns the ship's company in general. But I myself will sit at this table till sunrise.
Why on earth? Said Eustace.
Because this is a very great adventure, and no danger seems to me so great as that of knowing when I get back to Narnia that I left a mystery behind me through fear.
I'll stay with you, Reep, said Edmund. And I too, said Caspian.
And me, said Lucy.
And then Eustace volunteered also. And this was very brave of him, because never having read of such things or even heard of them till he joined the Dawn Treader made it worse for him than for any of the others. I beseech your majesty, know, my lord, your place is with the ship, and you have had a hard day's work while we've been idling. There was a lot of argument about this, but in the end Caspian had his way. As the crew marched off to the shore in the gathering dusk, none of the 5 watchers, except perhaps Reaping Sheep, could avoid a cold feeling in their stomach. They took some time choosing their seats at the perilous table. Probably everyone had the same reason, but no one said it aloud, for it was really a rather nasty choice. One could hardly bear to sit all night next to those 3 terribly hairy objects, which, if not dead, were certainly not alive in the ordinary sense. On the other hand, to sit at the far end, so that you would see them less and less as the night grew darker, and wouldn't know if they were moving, and perhaps wouldn't see them at all by about 2 o'clock. No, it was not to be thought of. So they sauntered round and round the table, saying, what about here, or perhaps a bit further down, or why not on this side, till at last they settled down somewhere about the middle, but nearer to the sleepers than the other end. It was about 10 by now, and almost dark. Those strange new constellations burned in the east. Lucy would have liked it better if they'd been the leopard and the ship, and other old friends of the Narnian sky. They wrapped themselves in their sea cloaks and sat still and waited. At first there was some attempt to talk, but it didn't come to much. And they sat and sat. All the time they heard the waves breaking on the beach. After hours that seemed like ages, there came a moment when they all knew they'd been dozing a moment before, but were all suddenly wide awake. The stars were all in quite different positions from those they had last noticed. The sky was very black, except for the faintest possible greyness in the east. They were cold, though thirsty and stiff, and none of them spoke, because now, at last, something was happening. Before them, beyond the pillars, there was the slope of a low hill, and now a door opened in the hillside, and a light appeared in the doorway, and a figure came out, and the door shut behind it. The figure carried a light, and this light was really all that they could see distinctly. It came slowly nearer and nearer, till it stood at last right at the table opposite to them. Now they could see that it was a tall girl, dressed in a single long garment of clear blue which left her arms bare. She was bareheaded, and her yellow hair hung down her back, and when they looked at her they thought they had never before known what beauty meant. The light which she was carrying was a tall candle in a silver candlestick, which was now set upon the table. If there had been any wind off the sea earlier in the night, it must have died down by now, for the flame of the candle burned as straight and still as if it were in a room, with the windows shut and the curtains drawn. Gold and silver on the table shone in its light. Lucy now noticed something lying lengthwise on the table which had escaped her attention before. It was a knife of stone, sharp as steel, a cruel-looking, ancient-looking thing. No one had yet spoken a word. Then Reaping Sheep first and Caspian next all rose to their feet, because they felt she was a great lady. "Travellers who have come from far to Aslan's table, why do you not eat and drink?" "Madam," said Caspian, "we feared the food because we thought it had cast our friends into an enchanted sleep." "They have never tasted it." "Please," said Lucy, "what happened to them?" "7 years ago they came here in a ship whose sails were rags, and her timbers ready to fall apart. There were a few others with them, sailors, and when they came to this table, one said, 'Here is the good place. Let us set sail and reef sail and row no longer, but sit down and end our days in peace.' And the second said, 'No, let us re-embark and sail for Narnia and the west. It may be that Myraz is dead.' But the third, who was a very masterful man, leapt up and said, 'No, by heaven, we are men and telmarines, not brutes. What should we do but seek adventure after adventure? We have not long to live in any event. Let us spend what is left in seeking the unpeopled world behind the sunrise.' And as they quarrelled, he caught up the knife of stone, which lies there on the table, and he would have fought with his comrades. But it is a thing not right for him to touch. And as his fingers closed upon the hilt, deep sleep fell upon all the three, and till the enchantment is undone, they will never wake." "What is this knife of stone?" asked Eustace. "Do none of you know it?" said the girl. I think," said Lucy, "I've seen something like it before. It was a knife like it that the White Witch used when she killed Aslan at the stone table long ago." "It was the same, and it was brought here to be kept in honour while the world lasts." Edmund, who had been looking more and more uncomfortable for the last few minutes, now spoke. "Look here, I hope I'm not a coward about eating this food, I mean, and I'm sure I don't mean to be rude. But we've had a lot of queer adventures on this voyage of ours, and things aren't always what they seem. When I look in your face, I can't help believing all you say. But then that's just what might happen with a witch, too. How are we to know you're a friend?" "You can't know. You can only believe. Or not." After a moment's pause, Reaping Sheep's small voice was heard.
"Sire, of your courtesy, fill my cup with wine from that flagon. It is too big for me to lift. I will drink to the lady."
Caspian obeyed, and the mouse, standing on the table, held up a golden cup between its tiny paws.
"Lady, I pledge you."
Then it fell to on the cold peacock, and in a short while everyone else followed his example. All were very hungry, and the meal, if not quite what you wanted for a very early breakfast, was excellent as a very late supper. "Why is it called Aslan's table?" asked Lucy presently. "It was set here by his bidding, for those who come so far. Some call this island the world's end, for though you can sail further, this is the beginning of the end." "How does the food keep?" asked the practical Eustace. "It is eaten and renewed every day. This you will see." "And what are we to do about the sleepers?" asked Caspian. "In the world from which my friends come," here he nodded at Eustace and the Pevensies, "they have a story of a prince or a king coming to a castle where all the people lay in an enchanted sleep. In that story he could not dissolve the enchantment until he had kissed the princess. But here it is different. Here he cannot kiss the princess till he has dissolved the enchantment." "Then," said Caspian, "in the name of Aslan, show me how to set about that work at once." "My father will teach you that." "Your father?" said everyone. "Who is he, and where?" "Look," said the girl, turning round and pointing at the door in the hillside. They could see it more easily now, for while they had been talking the stars had grown fainter, and great gaps of white light were appearing in the greyness of the eastern sky.